Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen of the media, and welcome again to the Office of the Leader of the Opposition for this press conference. The Leader of the Opposition will make his opening remarks, addressing a number of issues, and then, as usual, we will allow for questions. So, at this time, the Leader of the Opposition, Mr. Bharrat.
Thank you very much. On July 16, 2017, we saw an article in the Ghana Chronicle, and it was titled, "Too Inflexible." And in that article, the president mentioned several reasons why he thought that the opposition was giving him a hard time, was too inflexible on matters of national interest, and that this lack of cooperation is affecting the country. So if you were to quote President Granger, he said he made it clear that his administration is not opposed to talks with the opposition on non-constitutional matters, but noted that, and in direct quotes, it is good to speak with people who are prepared to speak with you, and we have had some difficulties. And then the head of state went on to cite several examples of his perception of the lack of cooperation from the opposition. Now, I wanted to address this issue because this has become the new excuse of the government. First, as I have pointed out several times, it was drug money causing the sloth in the economy, and that they were cleaning it out, and then that excuse ran out. And then it was Gaisuko, and that's still being peddled quietly, that they're spending too much on Gaisuko, so it's affecting the rest of the economy. But that has its limit too. That argument has its limit too, particularly when people see wanton spending, wasteful spending in so many other areas. So the new excuse that has emerged is that the People's Progressive Party somehow is trying to sabotage the economy by telling people not to invest, and secondly, that we are unprepared to talk with them, and they are open to talks about all sorts of matters, including matters that do not relate just to our Constitution. And that is part of their attitude to governance. So it is very important for the nation to understand our view on this matter, because I'm in a quandary. I do not know if the president genuinely believes this because of how far he is from reality of Guyana, where he has ensconced himself in the office of the president, doesn't have press conferences, listens to the converted. And so when he says these things, he may genuinely believe them because of his lack of touch with reality. Maybe I've always said the make-believe world that they're living. Or it could be that he's trying to mislead the nation. But either way, I have an obligation to point out how different a view we have on this matter of cooperation. So the president said For example, last year I addressed Parliament to lay out the legislative agenda and the financial considerations, and the entire opposition was absent. Now I want to take you through a little history of the President and his several addresses to the National Assembly. On June 10, 2015, the President addressed the National Assembly. We were not in Parliament at that time. And I'm going to quote directly from parts of his speech what he said to this country. He said, "Providing jobs for our people, particularly our young people, will be one of our priorities. Without jobs, they will never be able to escape from the cycle of poverty." Contrast that with the program the President taped with some members of the media when he said, "We never really promised jobs. The government can't deliver jobs." And then he went on to outline some of the things that people can do in Guyana, selling cook-up rice and all of that sort of thing. In the same speech, he said, "We shall craft a long-term national economic strategy." Are we any closer to this long-term economic strategy? In fact, what we have is confusion. You can never get clarity from any part of this government about what they're going to be doing next week, much less next year or 10 years from now. No clarity on this matter. He said further in that speech, "We shall establish a sovereign wealth fund derived from revenues from our forests, mines, waters, lands, and other natural resources to benefit generations to come." We're pleading with them, the entire opposition, the entire business community, all the NGOs are pleading with them to establish a sovereign wealth fund on transparent principles just to take care of the proceeds of oil and gas in the future. And there has been sloth in this regard and lack of transparency. Yet the President promised a sovereign wealth fund, not only for oil proceeds, but from forestry and from mining and from waters and lands, that this sovereign wealth fund would be created, getting revenue sources from getting revenue from all these sources. Are we any closer to this? So that's, again, what he says is very different from what they do. We shall introduce other job creation measures promoting small and medium-sized enterprises. How many small and medium-sized enterprises have been encouraged? In fact, if you go around the country, the experience is that a slew of these small and medium-sized enterprises are going into bankruptcy. And in the budget last year, they put in place a ton of administrative measures that will increase the cost and the ease of doing business, make it harder to do business for small and medium-scale enterprises. So it runs contrary to what he said. We will also work towards ensuring greater access to finance and capital to start new businesses. Where is this initiative? In fact, we have seen a mountain of bad debts in the banking system. Not new financing now for new ventures, but the opposite of it. We shall ensure that this National Assembly is granted administrative autonomy, institutional autonomy, political autonomy, and financial autonomy. Where is this? In fact, it has gotten even more repressive. You have seen the rulings of the Speaker You have seen the way they manage Parliament. It's anything but autonomous. And then on Green Guyana, he spoke at length about this. So, and that was the one we missed. On July 9, 2015, he addressed Parliament again. And we were not in Parliament. We got until August. So the first two speeches we missed. We attended the one that was on Venezuela's claims and Suriname's claims to Guyana's territory, which was held on the 22nd of October 2015. We were there for the 12th of May address, speaking about independence, year of Renaissance. That one dealt with social cohesion and green state, and I'm not going to tell you about those two issues because those will take a long time to chronicle how atrocious they have been at pursuing these two initiatives, or either one of them. Atrocious. And so we did miss the one on the 13th of October 2016. But we did not do so capriciously. Long before this sitting was held, I made a statement and I said it would be a dereliction of our duties as MPs to sit and listen to another lecture on good governance when the President, the Executive, cannot respect the holder of a constitutional post and give him a free hearing in this country. And I was referring to the Carville-Duncan matter. And we signaled long before the sitting that we will not attend if the President pursues this path, which would not see even natural justice being accorded to a holder of a constitutional post. So we signal why. But let me give you an indication of what we missed and how this president who wants to talk with us, what he said in this speech in October 2016. He said during the first deadly decade, which he called the Troubles in Guyana, without regard to the role they played in the Troubles, I've spoken about that at my last press conference, the numerous public statements from PNC and PNC members in support of the people who escaped, calling them freedom fighters. And the many visits to Buxton to urge people to come out and protect the community against the security forces. But we're not here to talk about that. He said there were, in that decade, 2 robberies a day. How many robberies do we have per day now? But that was the period of the Troubles. He said it was a time of deception, the PPP era. This is a year and a half nearly after the president got into office. And he's addressing the National Assembly, and this is his speech to the National Assembly, that he's trying to promote social cohesion and opposition cooperation to come out of it. So he says our period was a time of deception. It was a man-made criminal crisis. He spoke about the perilous economic situation, that cronyism had led to serial costly scandals. He listed the Hope Canal and a couple of others. Now, contrast that with the scandals that he has had. It pales into insignificance, the Hope Canal, that the approaches to the Hope Canal just sunk. Not the bridge, not the canal, not the cocos, but just the little road that they had to build up. But it was a failed project. So he then went on, not content to criticize our economic policy. He said the environmental policy will be remembered forever but not fondly for the administration's responsibility for the most destructive environmental disaster in Guyana's history, the 2005 floods. He blamed us for the 2005 floods. Then he went on to say, the exaggerated emphasis on narrow elements of the LCDS obscured this absence of strategic thought and action. Criticized the LCDS too. He said that the government entered a depressing financial landscape in May 2015. The economic legacy that this nation inherited, that is his government, was characterized by a lack of strategic planning and whimsical decision making. Not a growing economy, growing at one of the fastest pace in this region and around the world. Not that the debt had been reduced to a sustainable level. Not that we had vibrancy, but this is what he inherited. He repeated in that speech that he inherited the BK judgment, which is not true. He ignored the role of the Rudisa, the role they played in getting where the CCJ ruled against us on the Rudisa matter. And the CLICO matter, he misrepresented it again. He repeated the lies about Gaisupo, about the size of the project and the size of the debt. He said in that speech that they gave $4 billion to the rice industry. Absolutely untrue. So this is what we would listen to. We should go listen to lectures by the president where he criticizes everything unfairly that the PPP did, and we will never get a chance to speak. But it's a pattern with this president. He goes in a controlled environment, he talks to the media. He goes in a controlled environment to the parliament and he makes a speech and he disappears. And then, as is the norm in most democracies, where the president's speech should be debated, in our case, the speeches are never debated. So we don't get a chance to criticize or to correct the erroneous impressions he's made. So that is why, that's the history of our legislative engagement with the president. And so when he said, oh, they didn't come to listen to my wonderful speeches, etc., and that's the sign of an inflexible, uncooperative, opposition, well, you can judge for yourself whether we should have gone. He then went on to say, in the same article, when the budget consultations take place, they send a junior person or they don't participate at all. Now you remember in July 2015, even before we had gone to Parliament, the People's Progressive Party sent a team to the Ministry of Finance on budget consultations. You listen if these people are junior people. Pauline Savai, Edwan Edhill, Siraj, Irfan Ali, Rohi. These were the people in our team. The two persons who speak on economic matters, Edhill and Irfan Ali, were there. The General Secretary of the PVP was there, but the President said we send junior teams or we don't show up. And we did not show up subsequently in both years because we wrote the Minister of Finance and we asked the Minister of Finance for information to prepare for our presentation. Now, we're not going to go there with a wish list. We have a view on the management of this country. I would not be like some of the cabinet members. If you ask them today, including the president, what were the assumptions around which the numbers were built for the fiscal framework of this country, I doubt any of them can answer it. But it is my view that unless you know what the assumptions are, you cannot present an alternate fiscal environment to do much more in this country. And you're obligated blindly to accept Jordan's framework as the framework. We are not accepting Jordan's framework as the fiscal framework because we want to see whether the assumptions in crafting that framework were accurate and realistic, because that framework then has implications for monetary policy, balance of payment policy, everything. We asked for information on that, assumptions. We asked for information on the public sector investment program. We said, what are your strategic plans for each ministry so they could be reflected in the budget on an annual basis so we see a pattern. None of this was forthcoming. And so we are not going to just walk with our long hands and say, oh, we want this and that. We have been opposed to taxes. They know our position on these taxes because they're counterproductive, both from a perspective of welfare and from a perspective of economic growth or stimulus to economic growth. So we are not going to go to any budget consultation unless we're the opposition of Guyana. We have a long history of managing this country, the financial affairs. We're not going to just walk off the street and go in and just listen to Jordan and be happy that he accommodated us. We need information before we can make a preparation, a solid presentation. But that is not forthcoming, and therefore that has been our approach. He said further, the reform of the sugar industry, the attendance is very spotty. There has been a very low level of cooperation on the part of the opposition. So you know the history already, that his COI, they said they are waiting the COI to make a decision on Gaisuko. The COI came out. The COI said no closure. Granger threw away the COI and said it's not gospel. He threw it out the window. Then we know in November last year that Harman gave Wesley Curtin a letter to say, look around for buyers. We're prepared to sell the Gaisuko in whole or in part. In whole or in part. The whole of Gaisuko. Including the ones that they say they're keeping now. But that was November last year. Then on the 28th of December, a letter dated 28th of December, which got a day or so later to Freedom House. We were invited to a this is 2016, we were invited for consultations on the 31st. So note the time frame. 28th, it was dated. We're supposed to be there at 10 a.m. on the 31st. It came in about the 29th to 30th. So we have a 1 day to prepare. The second meeting we had, the letter came on the 31st of January. That one was signed by Harman. This was by Miss Edmond. For the meeting on the 3rd of February. And then the third meeting we had was on the letter came on was dated the 15th of February for the meeting on the 17th of February. 1 day notices. 1 day notices. They expect a serious party like ours to just, every time they send over a letter, to just walk over there without regard for documents or preparation on issues. But this revealed something. They were not really interested in what we had to say. They had already made a decision, and they needed the cover to say that we were being consulted. So they went through the perfunctory consultation on 3 occasions, but they never really wanted us there. So that's the record. That is why it's not spotty. Again, I don't know if Granger knows this. So then he says that the people on the PPP ticket don't show up at the municipal and regional levels. The GAM meeting, I think the Guyana Association of Municipalities. People were invited to the meeting, and they were preparing. All the mayors were ready to go from our side to go to the meeting. On April 6, 2016, Mr. Granger went and illegally swore in the mayor of Mabaruma, flouting an order of the High Court preventing the swearing in and the functioning of that municipality. So that changed the circumstances. We were prepared to go. Most of our mayors were getting ready to go. And then we were confronted with this illegal act. And that mayor, the illegally sworn in mayor, now would be at this meeting. And so some of our people said we're not going there, because if we show up there, it would mean a tacit endorsement of the illegality of the president. That is why the president can't think that whatever he does doesn't have consequences. Look at the local government commission, but I don't want to digress. And then, if you look at the experience with the National Regional Development Consultative Committee, was held on January 20th, 2017 at the Marriott Hotel. So they invited all of these chairmen and vice chairmen to come out. First of all, they were called 3 days before and told to fly to Georgetown. Now the PPP controls 7 regions. The BBB controls several of the municipalities, several of the municipalities. We control overwhelmingly, almost most of the NDCs. And this is the approach you tell them. So when I spoke with the regional chairman, they didn't even know what they came out to do. And they were then told that they would have to go to this meeting to establish this body, which could have seen the erosion of their authority, because counterpart bodies would have been established in the regions to allow municipal leaders now, or the mayors, to have equal status, co-chair status with these bodies that will extend their reach across the region rather than confine it to municipalities. It would have violated their constitutional rights. And so the chairman and the vice chairman wrote a letter saying, we're not coming there to do that. And then to be led with a procession of these flags that have not received the support of the region. So I just gave a few instances. I chose the ones that the president mentioned himself, where he said, here are some examples of non-cooperation and an inflexible opposition. And I wanted to say to this country that we have always been supportive at the national level. Contrast our behavior in Parliament with theirs. We have not attempted to cut any benefits to people, which they did. The 3 years they were in opposition, $90 billion when they were in control of the Parliament, $90 billion from the government's budget. We did not attempt to politicize the jailbreak. In fact, we sent, when they called, Ramjatan called me to say they wanted to give us a briefing, we sent our people there. But it was totally inadequate, and I'll ask Juan Edgel to say something about it in a moment. The briefing, it was almost like to just get the photo up. But there are serious questions about the jailbreak, too, that we have to address. And I keep hearing about the president excuses everything. So again, it was inherited from the PPP. But are we saying, my point about the moral hazard, I think we have to explore it in greater detail. That fire now is a useful tool by prisoners to get attention on what they want. So are we to say, because a lot of the newspaper articles, etc., has been focused on overcrowding, but are we saying now, since fire has become an effective tool, one, the first fire got the ministers running and Harman running over. The second fire got nearly 100 persons released. What is there to say? Can anyone in the media or elsewhere or in this government say, in a prison now that is not overcrowded, that fire will not be used as a tool, since it is an effective tool to secure early release or to secure the attention of the executive? So, the addressing conditions of the prison, important, very, very important. But the moral hazard issue goes beyond just issues of conditions of the prison. And then we've asked in a press release yet about some of the question, the separations of power. When a minister can say magistrates will go, is it that the executive is directing the magistracy now or the judiciary what to do? And who gave the instruction? Because we assume those people were placed in prison and not given bail for a reason. For a reason. So what changed? Is it just the fire? And how could people, as we saw, who were convicted for or in there for rape and assault and all of these things, when we are told differently, that and people who were caught with guns, repeat offenders for serious offenses, how come they secured bail? When we were told by the minister that it's people who are really there for minor offenses and who are scheduled to be released shortly. So many unanswered questions that seem to have been swept under the carpet on this matter, and we're only dealing with conditions of prison. Now, I think it is to absolve this executive of any responsibility. And they are responsible. They have stewardship in government. Just like how Granger blamed us for the floods in 2005, he could blame us for the floods in 2005, but wouldn't take ownership of the floods now. I was in Blackbush Polder over the weekend. I visited the 4 polders. And they lost tremendous losses there. Cash crop, their rice, their animals, etc. And not a single government official, at least from the central level, went to visit them. Almost a month now. So what about that flood? Should he not take responsibility for it? And if you can blame us for floods, why shouldn't you take the blame for the prison? But as I said before, he lives in a different world. Maybe I will end here. We can deal with the other issues as we go along. I just want to tell you a bit more about before I think that I heard now that they're saying that the Americans, some of the ministers are saying to people on the ground, the Americans have given them 10 years guarantee that they'll be in power. A couple of ministers, now they're struggling hard to maintain, to give answers to people. So they say, I know this is pure nonsense. I know it's pure nonsense. And Granger, on the inflexible comment, I want to come back to him. And I want the country to judge who is inflexible. When the country called, the miners called on him to meet with them to discuss their plight, he said, no, I'm not meeting with the miners. You're not meeting with the miners. They couldn't secure a meeting with him to discuss their plight. And they're killing the mining industry with the taxes they've put in place. The 100% increase in the tributers tax, the change of the 2% final tax to now an advance payment. People have to pay 28%. The taxes on their equipment, killing the mining sector. When the rice farmers pleaded with him for help, he said, this is a private industry. Who is inflexible? When we asked that a feasibility study be done for sugar and a social impact study? They said no. Who is inflexible? When the people who are protesting were protesting outside to remove the VAT from education, asked that it be reviewed, he said, no, I can't do it now. Who is inflexible? Who is inflexible when we called for an investigation of the corrupt bond issue that is still ongoing and refused to do anything about it? Who is inflexible when we had $1.4 billion spent, wasted, and we call on the president to look into it, to give us some answers, and he would not. In fact, he justified it by saying he knew of this private company. And who is inflexible when we've been trying to get information for over a year now from this government about the DDL settlement, which would cost $80 billion to the Treasury? Who is inflexible? And who is inflexible when we ask him just for the list of the names of the people that the president released and they refused to give them? I can give you a long list of things. Who's inflexible when we beg for one day in Parliament to clean up a bill that is so patently wrong, like the Coroner's Act, enshrining in 2017 anachronistic positions, clauses that related to the colonial era? We just wanted for elegance to clean up the bill. Who's inflexible when they would take 100 and something pages bill on terrorism with serious threats to civil rights in this country and rush it through the parliament in all three readings in a single session? Who is inflexible? I can list a long set of things. And he talks about inflexibility. This government is deaf to people's concerns, and they hide behind all these speeches, etc. So I hope I've dealt with that issue adequately, because this is their new mantra out there. We prepare to work with the PPP, but these people don't want to talk to us. They don't want to listen. They're hostile. They're sabotaging us. Look at characterizing. They're almost for 2 years now. The entire focus has been on painting us as corrupt. In the face, even in the absence of evidence, all the audits and everything else. Our suggestion, who's inflexible, when I suggested to the president over a year ago to hire an international firm or go to Interpol to try to trace the assets of all former government officials and current government officials held abroad, so that we can get rid of this perception once and for all about who stashed money abroad. Why wouldn't he do it? Who's inflexible? Because he knows if he does it, then they can't continue peddling that on the ground. So, thank you. And one, before you go, before I take questions, can you just quickly give the media just a short synopsis of that meeting and how sparse information was?
Thank you. On Saturday morning, I'm sure that you were not advised by the DPI, because none of you were outside of Parliament when we came out. But the parliamentary opposition met with Minister Ramjatan, Minister Patterson, the Commissioner of Police, and the Director of Prison to be briefed on the current jailbreak and fire situation. And the first thing I will tell you is that nothing that was said at the briefing was different or any more details than what is already known in the public. So we didn't need to go to the briefing. All we needed to do was to listen to you from your press conferences or read the newspapers. When we sought to ask questions, and the Commissioner of Police and the Director of Prisons started answering, the twin sins of the APNU AFC government kicked in. Ignorance and arrogance. I call them the twin sins. Ignorance and arrogance. The impatience and intolerance of and the unwillingness to share information. The two professional gentlemen, technical, operational people, were shut down. For example, we asked specific questions, like, for example, was there any truth to the fact that members of the media were at the prisons before 1645? Because we read a Stabroek News article on July 10th that says 3:15 Stabroek News was on site having heard of unrest within the prison. So the timelines were not correct. They said that none of you have ever asked those questions in your press conferences. The second thing we sought to get was there any time when the prison officers were not in control of the prisons, or did the prisoners take command of the prison at any time and started to release people? The director of prisons started to give us an indication that prison officers were apparently placed in a room and set a fire, and prisoners had to rescue those prison officers from that room that was lit afire. I'm sure that wasn't said to you in any of your press conferences. At that stage, Mr. Ramjatan basically wanted to shut the meeting down, saying all of those things will come out at a commission of inquiry. So I had to say to him, you know who you're talking to? This is the political opposition. We're not children. You know our statement. We have said we're not giving any political cover to these criminals. We want the security of the state. And if you're going to have the security of the state, the opposition must know what are the facts so that we'll be able to provide the necessary statements in support of the security forces to ensure they shut the meeting down. So we didn't really have a brief. We had two ministers, and it would appear that Minister Patterson is the new Minister of Public Security because he chaired that meeting, and he was the one who was featuring in giving all of the responses and telling the commissioner and the director of prisons if they can or cannot speak. And I found it to be very interesting because you have a vice president who's the Minister of Public Security, but the Minister of Public Infrastructure is chairing a meeting with the political opposition, briefing us on the security situation in Ghana. So I don't know if he's offered his resignation or there's a switch of roles. I don't know. You can find out that in detail. But it was inadequate. There was nothing that the opposition could have profited, and you are sure the leader of the opposition has made statements that we are fully in support of the police and the prison in terms of restoring order, the safety of prisoners. There was nothing that we left the meeting with. It was an exercise in futility. It was a waste of time. The briefing was inadequate. It was just an opportunity for the statement that came out after that was probably prepared before the meeting just to be issued.
Okay. Yes. Any question?
Mr. Jagdeo, Roy and James Knightley. Can you, if you can, give your take on the Chief Justice's interpretation of Article 1612? That's one.
Yeah.
And last week and this week you mentioned the President's COI in what he called troubled times. If he decide to go ahead with his COI, how prepared are you to deal with such a COI?
Yeah, well, that's why we said we've heard him promise this COI, and it would be interesting because maybe he should pursue it if he really wants to know the truth, and that it would not be shut down like the Walter Rodney one when there is an adverse finding about the role that many of the people in Parliament now, many of our current leaders in government, played in the troubled times. So we are open to it. The president can name whatever COI he wants to. He's been doing this liberally. I heard another one is starting today about who wants to assassinate him and whether the police investigated that thoroughly. So I don't know what's preventing him from doing this. because he has full discretion. I have not seen the written judgment as yet. And so you would have seen my comments. I'm still very cautious, and I said I would like to see the written judgment of the Chief Justice acting. It seems as though there's this impression that there's one issue, that is whether the president can unilaterally or in his own discretion appoint from people who are not submitted by the leader of the opposition. That seems to, from the public interpretation so far, seem to be a matter that has been ruled on or mentioned in the judgment. We don't know if it was an aside or it would be part of the ruling. And if that is so, if it is part of the judgment, we will have to support Mr. Gaskin in challenging it. And the reason is that you would recall that there have been several submissions, but this issue was not a matter that was in Mr. Gaskin's case to the court. And so neither side, the plaintiff nor the defendants, made submissions on these matters, the lawyers for neither side, because the issue was not put, that question was not put to the court. So it would be very strange if there is a ruling on a matter that neither side sought an answer to, because, and therefore, neither Gaskin or the Bar Association or my lawyers made a submission on that behalf. And the Attorney General himself did not make a submission. So unless the matter was raised in the hearing itself, and both sides were called upon in court to make arguments, or they were asked to do so in writing, then we believe that it would be an extremely strange sort of ruling. Because neither side were heard on the matter. And so how do you rule if neither side sought this answer to this question, nor made submissions on it?
Just one follow-up, Mr. Jagdeo. I think last week at your press briefing you said, or the week before, that there's a part, not that there's a part, but if the president can release the names of persons on the list who are not fit and proper, so that you would know how to amend that. The president earlier today said there's no part of the Constitution that says that, and so he doesn't have to do that. How would you respond to that?
Well, the court, from this ruling, the ruling, that was one of the questions that Mr. Gaskin sought answers from the court for, a ruling of the court on. And the court said, whilst he is that does not have to do so, but for good governance, that he should, because, well, let me don't say why, but that he should. But the court made another a ruling that is diametrically opposite to what the president said, that he will only look at the list when if he finds all the names acceptable. And the court said, even if there is one name acceptable, he is obligated to examine that name. And you can't reject the list until it's a perfect list. And the court also said you can have 6 persons in the fit and proper category too. So, in light of this, and the president's public statement some time back that he found at least one of the persons acceptable, someone should ask him, in light of the court's ruling on this matter, that if he had found in an interview, he said one of the 6, right, was acceptable, then he was obligated to go ahead and appoint that according to the court judgment. Well, but I'm still awaiting the written judgment.
Mr. Jagdeo, could you say if you're still moving ahead to submit a third list, and if so, could you provide us with an update?
Well, I'm still discussing with people, but in light of this ruling, I'd have to have some further internal discussions on the matter, and maybe seek some engagement with the executive about these same issues. So I'm awaiting the judgment, the written judgment.
So you've put a pause on the...
No, I'm still going through the process of meeting people. But yes.
Okay, Jeremy, 2 questions on the oil and gas sector, sir. Firstly, do you think the judiciary is prepared enough to deal with the legal issues which may arise? And secondly, our newspaper has carried a number of articles detailing the track record of ExxonMobil across the world in terms of how they would have, the state in which it would have certain countries. Is this a matter of concern for the opposition?
Well, I've been very, very critical of the government's approach, but without trying to run down the country, because I would have preferred that an industry that has long-term implications would have been dealt with in a more apolitical fashion. But when you try to raise issues of a technical nature, you have like the cuss down from Raphael Trotman, who started talking about Skeldon Factory and the Borbies Bridge and something else, without addressing the points raised about the Sovereign Wealth Fund and about raising expectations on Julie, etc., and about the Crab Island project, all of these things that they talk about. And by the way, nobody says anything anymore about the $27 billion losses at the gold board between 2015 and 2016. 2 years. That's more than the entire Skeldon factory. I keep making that point. Under Raphael Trotman's tenure as minister, he lost 27 billion, the equivalent of a Skeldon factory in 2 years because of incompetence. And so, but that's an aside. Coming back to the key point. So, my view is that ExxonMobil has operated in many countries. ExxonMobil is a huge company. Huge company. ExxonMobil earnings alone would dwarf the gross domestic product of many countries. ExxonMobil may have more technical people than all the Caribbean countries put together at the technical level in terms of corporate lawyers, etc. So when we deal with a company of this nature, we have to get as many skilled people who have clarity about our negotiating position with us in the same room, preparing for our negotiations, our discussions, and guiding us in the agreements we sign. Now, you know as well as I do that bunch that we have in Parliament can't lead any technical negotiation. That bunch that we have in Parliament And so I know lots of APNU people who may do it, who may be, but they're just not given prominence in this government. These are PNC people, bright young ones and stuff, who will do 100 times better job, but they're not there. So that bunch cannot lead us. Yet they bristle when you talk about buying in the best technical skills, etc. But your counterpart in the negotiation will, as most companies do, try to get the best deal for themselves. They'll be stupid not to do that, but you have to protect national interests. And my point is that they don't have the technical skills. I don't see any attempt to acquire it. I don't see the transparency being pursued that would allow us to know who the negotiators are, what the negotiating brief is, so we can share our views on on it, so that, and that can be discussed in a few committees or in smaller circles, so it doesn't get out widely. So I see none of that. And my fear is they'll be hopelessly outmaneuvered. Not because ExxonMobil is a monster, but because ExxonMobil will look out for ExxonMobil. And we have to look out for Ghana. The ideal thing is in this partnership, both sides benefit. But that has to be worked on in terms of solid engagement agreements. So that's one. Two, on the other hand, we have to build the capacity, the technical capacity, to make sure that we can track, and that once we sign the agreements with ExxonMobil, and there are agreements that can withstand international scrutiny, that we have the capacity to enforce those regulations and that agreement. So it may be of a technical nature, maybe of an environmental nature, and this is why we were more supportive of a model of the Petroleum Commission that keeps the minister far away from it. But now in the parliament we have a bill where the minister can appoint the board, he can fire the board. If he doesn't appoint the board, he becomes the board. The board. He will appoint the chairman, and if he doesn't appoint the chairman, he becomes the chairman. He appoints the deputy chairman, the secretary, everything revolves around the minister. So that model will not allow us to build strong technical capacity. So that's a huge problem that we have with this approach of the government. Then I saw the GRA saying they're setting up a special unit to deal with invoices from ExxonMobil. And if the GRA doesn't even have the capacity to conduct audits on many of our businesses now, something has to be wrong. GRA is collecting our taxes. We have to have a unit that is properly staffed, that has people with experience of dealing with the petroleum industry, the experience in that sector, who can say, this service that we're buying here, we are aware that it could be competitively sourced from another place at the same quality, at the same quality, but competitively sourced at a lower price. Why did you not pursue that option? Can ask those questions. Do you think this unit that they have now in GRA could do that? No, they're struggling to go after people to collect VAT and even complex local invoices they can't handle. So again, it sounds good. The government looks really good. The GRA is getting ready, but it is pure. I don't like saying the word nonsense, but let me say it is. They're not defending our best interests as a country, and so ExxonMobil is a big country, as I said, a company that operates everywhere, and I don't care too much about what they did in Trinidad and Tobago. Once we protect our national interests, we have a duty. ExxonMobil will always look out for themselves. But the idea is we have to look out for ourselves to get a fair share, and then the partnership will run smoothly. Both sides work well, and they respect agreements, and they keep their sides of the bargain. That's what we have to forge. But with this government, you're not, and you can't get information. You see, I've seen some of the articles written, and different groups calling for transparency, greater transparency, but they're not forthcoming at all. They're not forthcoming. In the meantime, they're busy doing political work in South Georgetown, and I met some people from New Amsterdam and Linden who said to me, they're telling us, don't worry, you'll have lots of money to spend in 2020 and all of that, and we'll give you checks and stuff like that on the ground. But this is a big concern, and it's good that the newspapers are raising some issues about these matters from our perspective, particularly our perspective.
And the first question is the judiciary in terms of preparedness to deal with legal issues.
That I think it's very difficult. It's like when we had the commercial court. So you have to build capacity there. So I would hope that eventually you would have more specialized courts, like a commercial court, that can deal in a swifter manner with some of these cases, and will have a couple of judges, not all the judges, maybe a couple of judges who can build capacity to deal with the issues surrounding oil and gas, so training and the like.
Sir, Ravan Singh and Chronicle. In 2014, Exxon would have indicated how much they would invest into oil exploration. Could you say if the PPP at that time had started anticipating Guyana becoming an oil producing nation, and if there were any attempts at creating the infrastructure that is needed to govern the oil and gas sector?
Yeah, sure.
And if the government
Sure.
is building on...
Yeah, sure. When I spoke in Parliament, that is because it's why you didn't do it. And I pointed out the struggles we had. We gave a license to CGX, and then you recall the whole issue with Suriname, and we lost almost 10 years of exploration and drilling because we then had to go and invoke this clause on the compulsory arbitration on the International Convention, the law of the sea. We had to go to court, we had to spend a lot of money, but the outcome was good for Ghana. And since, maybe 1899, we had another settled, internationally settled border, because some of the others are settled as far as I'm concerned too, but that one was recognized. That was a gap there on the maritime boundary. And so then we resumed. And at ExxonMobil, we had to nurture investment. Remember, for a company to just put a couple $100 million US, $150 million at least, in drilling a well when there is a 5 or 10% chance of success, 5 to 10% chance of success, you had to encourage people. And so that is why a lot of it was pushing for the drilling, encouraging. They found oil just before. It was May, I think, May. It was in May 2015. So we always knew, as I explained once in Parliament, when Trotman went on with his tirade, that we didn't want to do with what had happened with the hydropower division in the GGMC. In the maybe 40 years ago, a hydropower division was created and well staffed, lots of people. And we never produced, after many, many years, with the staff paying them, etc., never had a single kilowatt of hydropower produced, except from Mokomok. Single kilo. We didn't want to do that again, build a large petroleum unit over there, and then sit around and wait for oil to be found, which could be, you never know when it will happen. But we knew that we'd have to ramp up quickly. So in our manifesto, you will see, we spoke about this, the Sovereign Wealth Fund. And I could do this if they give me one lawyer, and they don't even need to do that. I could create a model of a sovereign wealth fund within a month with some of the strongest principles for separation from the political people, from the investment decisions of the fund, and from the access to the funds, because that's critical. And a model that will work well for Guyana, because it will not destroy the other sectors. So we can do it within a month. So I don't see why this big gap and all of that stuff. Why for over 2 years now after they promised that they can't do it. So they're just making it complex. And when they do come up with something like the infrastructure now that they're putting in, the Petroleum Commission, they're doing it in a manner that will bring it under the control of a minister. Imagine, they criticize us a lot for too much ministerial powers when they were there, and they would get rid of all these ministerial powers. So the PPP knew it worked very hard to get us where we are today, because we work consistently with these companies to push them and encourage them to put money into exploration. And as a result of that, the country found oil too. The country found oil. Not a single effort by APNU. Not a single effort. The oil was found under the PPP. And the investments started taking place in that period.
Sir, if I can ask you, former CEO of NBS, Mr. Arkin, recently won the court case. He sued the institution. Looking back, do you think the government at that time made the wrong decision in letting him go?
The government did not, the government did not make any decision to let him go. NBS is governed by statute. NBS is a private entity. The board of NBS fired him for what they considered reasons. No, government had absolutely nothing to do with it. And then the matter went to the ombudsman. You recall that issue. And the ombudsman, it was said that the ombudsman said that Jagdeo treated him unfairly or something like that, some nonsense like that. And the ombudsman said, I didn't. That was what he said that I included in my report. So they misrepresented it as that was a finding of the ombudsman. But he sought to make it political, and then they went on APNU platform. So it had nothing to do with politics, absolutely nothing, and the government at that time made no decision in relation to his firing. He was an employee of the institution, and the institution fired him.
Yeah, if I can follow up, any view on why he would seek to make a matter like that political?
People do that all the time for sympathies. So, they do that all the time for sympathies. Thank you.